Chapter 1. It was in Eden that the seed was first mentioned. 2 A.D. The sky seemed a little brighter than usual, the stars shimmering like sharply focused dots dancing on an inky black canvas. The moon, too, was glorious, ever showing its gray face to the earth in solemn and solitary dignity. Of all the lights in heaven, the greatest was the new star that had only recently appeared and hung suspended over the city itself. It was the perfect night for traveling. It was an even better night for completing a journey. 3 figures on camels followed the little road leading to the city. Dusty, tired, and happy to see the lights of Jerusalem flickering in the distance, the men did not speak as their camels plodded down the highway. Not far behind them came the rest of the group, servants atop camels weighed down with the trappings of a long sojourn. The caravan halted on a rise in the road. The 3 men looked at each other, and then at the bright star hanging low on the horizon. The star was set above the city, as if its light alone ruled the evening sky. The men were obviously of some importance. Their traveling clothes were distinctly Babylonian. They wore headgear in the Eastern style and carried costly jewels hidden in their clothing. Each was like the other in appearance, although they were different in character. All 3 seemed poised and purposed as they made their way through the desert night. "The gods be praised," said Caspar. "This must be the city." "This is Jerusalem," answered Melchior, "the holy city of the Jews. Perhaps we are mistaken?" "Nonsense," retorted Caspar as he took a drink from his water pouch. He wiped his mouth. "No, this is it. I'm sure of it." "Who rules in these parts?" asked Melchior. "Herod, the king of the Jews," came the voice of Balthazar, "or king so long as Rome permits it. He is a crafty one, though, and not to be dealt with lightly." "No doubt," said Caspar, "yet we must seek him out and inquire where the child might be found." The 3 continued toward Jerusalem, wondering what the end of their adventure would hold for them. They had known for some time theirs was a sacred task. Called out of Chaldea to pay homage to a newborn king, Caspar, Melchior, and Balthazar had left their exalted positions as magi to find the child whose birth had unmistakably beckoned them. All of their calculations pointed to this place, and the star had guided them the entire journey. Now it was rewarding their efforts with precision. "It is good to know we shall soon be in the presence of the one foretold," said Melchior. "We will be forever blessed in this memory." "Yes," said Caspar, "tomorrow we shall visit King Herod. I'm sure he will be interested in our mission." Unseen by the humans, 2 large dark figures watched as the caravan passed by. They grinned at each other. "Do you also suppose Herod will be interested in their mission?" asked one of the angels. The other smiled and nodded, his reddish eyes gleaming, then responded, "I believe I can guarantee it." All right, come to order." The din of the energized gathering of angels quickly abated as Michael and Gabriel took the dais that stood in front of the largest assembly hall in the academy of the host. Some of the students, who had never spoken with either of the archangels, watched the 2 rulers, whose exploits on earth were becoming well known in heaven. A few even hoped to pose a question to them, or catch a brief conversation with them after the meeting. For Michael, this was a familiar setting. He had become accustomed to sitting in on Crispin's classes, even doing some teaching now and then. Most of these were unfamiliar faces, some of the myriad of angels the Most High had created. Whenever he saw a face he knew, however, he nodded and smiled. He thought back to his own time at the academy. He was like these eager candidates, many of whom were hopeful to be under Michael's personal command, as warriors of the host. Gabriel was not as comfortable in the role of instructor as he was in the role of messenger. He much preferred repeating words already reasoned out than presenting his own information, even in a friendly environment like this. but his great respect for Crispin brought him to the academy with Michael to discuss the events unfolding on earth. Michael glanced over at his friend and laughed at his predicament. "Come now, Gabriel," he said in mock concern. "Surely one who carries the revelations of the Most High to the corners of creation will not be upended by some bright angels in one of Crispin's classes." Gabriel gave Michael an incredulous look. "Of course not," he retorted. "After all, Michael, I am privy to the greatest revelations in heaven. Why, I've even given information to the chief elder." He looked up in mock surprise. "And even to you, Michael." Michael grinned at the response. "I love the academy," Gabriel continued, glancing around the room, "and these angels. But I prefer delivering messages, not creating them." "Come to order, please," repeated Crispin. The angels settled into hushed silence as the archangels continued their banter. He stared at Michael and Gabriel. "Ahem. I'm speaking now to our guests who are intent on their own conversation," he added playfully. "Good master, we beg your forgiveness," said Michael. "Gabriel cannot restrain his enthusiasm for this occasion. I was instructing him to stop chattering." "Yes, so I see," said Crispin, who nodded at Gabriel with the hint of a grin. Crispin looked over the class with a scholarly expression and authority that captured the room. He then glanced in the direction of Michael and Gabriel. "My dear angels," he began, "this is a wonderful moment in the history of this academy. I know you have awaited this moment for some time now, as have I. Before we open the discussion for questions, I would like to read a brief statement which I have prepared, and, with the indulgence of our esteemed guests, the archangels Michael and Gabriel, I will commence reading." An aide to Crispin handed a scroll with a wide golden band around its center to the revered teacher. He unrolled the scroll with little ceremony. Michael glanced at Gabriel and gave him a "here we go" look. Crispin began reading. "To the students of the Academy of the Host, an account of those events which have been both witnessed and experienced on earth since the dark rebellion began, and which have revealed in some measure the wonderful and mysterious and ultimate intention of the Lord our God, the Most High Creator. Inasmuch as the Lord, in his wisdom, ordered the recording of the greater portion of the events we are about to recount to you in the Kingdom Chronicles, as well as in the Chronicles of the Host, it is our intention to give those details we believe are instructive and of interest to those of you whose future ministry on earth will depend on your ability to deal with the fallen wills of both humans and angels alike. Indeed, there are two wills with which we contest on both earth and in the heavenlies, and yet they are of the same mind, the same dark source. The mind of man has, since the great disaster in Eden, been twisted and bent on selfish industry. The once glorious earth has been transformed into a blood-stained planet of hopelessness and hate. It thus becomes the ministry of the host to secure with the Most High the final outcome of his great and glorious plan, something we still don't understand, but in which we shall play some part as ministering spirits." Crispin handed the scroll back to the aide, who bowed his head and rolled it up as he walked away. Crispin then returned his focus to the capacity-filled room. He motioned for the two archangels to join him at the dais. "You all are a part of the greatest contest ever to have presented itself," he began. "You have witnessed or heard of events great and small in the brief but brutal history of the earth. These events, when taken in total, begin to paint for us a picture that becomes both clear and murky with the birth of the child at Bethlehem." At the mention of Bethlehem, many of the angels in the room looked at Gabriel, who had played such a visible role during that event. Michael smiled discreetly at his friend, whose message to Mary had been so shattering. "I think you're a hero," he whispered playfully. Gabriel grumbled something back, causing Michael to grin. "And so, while we have these two ruling angels among us, we shall take advantage of them," Crispin continued. "But go easy on them. It has been a while since they were my students in the academy." The room burst into laughter. "Perhaps before we open the class for questions, we should hear from Michael and Gabriel. our great archangels." The room broke out in cheers and applause as the two powerful angels looked at one another, as if deciding who should speak first. Finally, Gabriel came to the platform and began addressing the assembly. "Thank you, Crispin," he began, "but we all know that there is only one who is great in heaven." Crispin nodded his head in agreement and glanced toward the great mountains of the north, where the Lord's presence rested. "We angels," Gabriel continued, "warriors and ministers of the Most High God, have been given a sacred task to serve the Lord by entering the world of humans, those curious creatures made in God's very image, whose rebellion has cost them everything, and for whom our Lord is planning some great work through the newborn child. What this child shall accomplish, or what shall be his end, only the Most High knows. Ours is not to raise questions. Ours is merely to obey the Lord in matters great and small. I will be more than happy to answer any question this body might have." He looked over at Crispin. "But I, for one, am looking forward to hearing from the greatest teacher in heaven." The room again broke out in praises to the Lord and applause for the archangel and the wise angel who was their instructor. Michael then began speaking. "As you are learning, the human question is a complicated one. As angels and servants of the Most High God, it is our task to accomplish the Lord's will in heaven and on earth as He deems necessary. I heard a number of you before this session questioning the Lord's long-suffering in dealing with such capricious spirits as human beings, the creature turning on its creator sort of thing. But beware, angels were guilty of this before humans." Quiet held the room as the angels clung to Michael's words. "Still, humans have, by their own choice, you may recall, established a world that is essentially anti-God. It was not meant to be that way from the beginning, but this is the outcome of a free will that has tasted sin and gathered an appetite for it. We cannot question the Lord's motives for loving creatures who treat Him in such unloving ways. As Gabriel said, we serve the Lord's purposes, not our own." "Thank you, Michael and Gabriel," commented Crispin, who now took over the presentation and broke the silent spell of the room. "I'm certain your ministry on earth will be of great interest to these eager angels, and having once sat under my teaching, I'm also quite certain a portion of my instruction carried you in some of your more challenging moments." Michael and Gabriel laughed, nodding their heads in agreement. The room also fell to laughter. "In all seriousness, I appreciate the sharp observation made by Michael concerning the capricious nature of humans. It is quite true. Humans are a strange mixture of behaviors. Ever since the disaster in Eden, the one-time innocence that was known to those first humans has been distorted and mired in the darkness of pride and rebellion, a behavior we all witnessed in this very kingdom in the distant past." Crispin began to pace, clearly in his element. "Our Lord had determined that in Eden He would create a people with whom He would fellowship, in a way even angels cannot appreciate. Remember the speculations and the wonder leading up to that dramatic day when the first man was created? We don't know what the Creator was doing, but we understood it would be glorious, whatever He did." Crispin closed his eyes, as if drinking in the day in Eden so long ago. "Adam was a beautiful creature, almost godlike in his perfection. He was given the freedom to rule and govern the earth in the Lord's name. He was given authority over all the creatures, and even allowed to name them. He was to become the father of a great nation of humans who would live in fellowship with the Lord and would steward His world forever. He was given a mate." Upon these words a quiet rumble among the angels began. The word Eve could be heard here and there in the room. Crispin looked over the sea of faces. "Ah, now," Crispin continued, wagging a finger, "Eve is only a part of this problem. Many angels accuse Eve for the current state of affairs. I submit to you that the rebellion in Eden was the responsibility of Adam, not Eve." The reaction in the room was one of surprise. "You see, Michael, angels can learn something." Michael and Gabriel smiled. "Yes, hear me. Adam was the responsible party in Eden. It was to Adam the law was given, not to Eve. It was Adam to whom the responsibility for upholding the law was delivered, not to Eve. Now, Eve was a catalyst, to be sure. But Adam, did he attempt to stop her as she fell into the trap of our enemy? Where was he? He was standing there when it happened, and complicit in the crime. So, instead of remaining true to God's one great prohibition to him, and possibly atoning for her sin by obeying the Lord, he himself disobeyed the very law God Most High had delivered to him personally. Eve fell prey to her own senses and the subtle cunning of a far greater intellect. But Adam, he fell prey to himself, a far deadlier adversary. "Good teacher," an angel shouted, "are you saying that Adam might have prevented the current state of affairs had he remained true, even after Eve ate?" Crispin was annoyed at the interruption. "I would prefer to wait on your questions until after the presentation, but as this has always been a point of sharp debate among the host, I will answer your question by simply saying we shall never know. But wouldn't it be interesting to discover what the outcome might have been had Adam stayed true, despite Eve's disobedience?" He looked to the archangels standing near him. "You were both there in Eden, as were some of these in attendance. It was a tremendous contest of wills. I like to think that perhaps Adam's obedience might have made all the difference. Perhaps not. In any case, we shall never know." Michael's mind sped back to that bitterly disappointing day when the plan of God fell victim to the pride of man. He recalled Eve's discussion with the serpent. Lucifer certainly was in top form that day. He used the cunning and intellect of a beast to tempt Eve into failure. The memory of thousands of angels, wicked and holy, swooping in and watching the drama unfold in the center of the garden, was especially poignant. The evil angels under Lucifer's control were baiting and hostile, laughing, cajoling, and encouraging the trap. The holy angels, horrified at the humans' disgrace, could only watch in silent shame as Adam and Eve walked from innocence into death. "I mentioned two minds at work on earth, for there is indeed another mind that is active and engaged, far more cunning than that of man, and one that has seeded in mankind a destructive nature, driven by pride and destined for destruction. It is this carrier of iniquity, this depraved and fallen spirit, that has overtaken the world, and who, through the assistance of other like-minded spirits, fosters the insanity now flourishing in the one-time paradise." "Lucifer," someone whispered. "Yes, of course," said Crispin with a sign of resignation. "Lucifer, called Satan by our Lord through some of the human prophets, the adversary, our one-time brother who, with his horrible group of compliant and ambitious angels, low spirits all and demons by designation, kindle in men the very passions now holding them prisoner. These base spirits fill the minds and hearts of humans with all manner of wickedness and sensuality, with a lust for power and an appetite for wealth, and then, assuming the role of earthly gods, they swagger for the men who swear by them, priests and prophets in unholy alliance with fallen angels, fostering meaningless religious ceremony that finds salvation in itself, but whose end is only death." "Good master, why would humans who have rejected the living God serve this or that god on earth?" asked Alamar, a warrior whom Michael had recently pegged to join him on earth. "Excellent question, Alamar," said Crispin, who had decided to open the teaching up to discussion. "The reason for this behavior is quite evident, and is a great paradox. Since their disobedience in Eden, humans become essentially anti-God, as you have reminded us. Yet they also possess a Godward thrust, an inner spirit that careens them through life in search of meaning, to link up with that which has been lost in antiquity, so to speak. Of course, devoid of truth and left to their own devices, and encouraged by dark spirits and their own base instincts, they find refuge in things carnal and earthly, dark and forbidden." He paused, and then added, "This is the price of rebellion, the fruit of pride. For they long for truth in connection with their Creator, yet have settled for something far inferior. And in their blind quest, they pursue the very truth they have rejected, while rejecting the very truth they pursue." "So what hope do humans have?" Alamar continued. "I will of course serve the Lord my God in any task, but it seems humans have lost their ability to relate to the Lord in a holy way. Why does he continue this ministry to them?" Crispin looked at Gabriel, who nodded and began speaking. "Because the Lord, ever willing that humans regain that pre-fallen state, is at work on earth and has been since Eden," remarked Gabriel. "Remember, while Eden was the site of great misfortune, it was also the beginning of great hope. It was at Eden that the Lord prophesied the one who should come and undo the work of darkness begun by Lucifer." "And it was in Eden the seed was first mentioned," added Michael, "the seed that has recently been delivered in Bethlehem." "And thus it becomes our ministry to serve mankind by serving the child," continued Crispin. "Oh, I don't pretend to understand how the child Jesus will do it, but the fact he is the Son incarnate, born of a woman, must be giving Lucifer something worrisome to think about." "Remember the circumstances of the child's birth," said Gabriel. "And what are we to do to serve the Son?" asked another. "I suspect the Son comes to do what Adam was unable to do," said Crispin, "to remain true to his Father, and in so doing he will crush the head of Lucifer. It's all been foretold." "Ah!" exclaimed Alamar. "So through obedience the Son will crush the serpent." He paused for a moment. "But what is so extraordinary about that? Can mere obedience undo the darkness of sin?" Crispin looked at the angel intently. "There is nothing mere about obedience," he said. "No human has been able to maintain an obedient relationship with the Most High. Some angels have not. Obedience has been a catalogue of failure where humans are concerned. But I assure you this, if obedience is the key to the Son's crushing of Lucifer, then it shall be an extraordinary obedience indeed, and at great cost." He motioned Gabriel to be ready. "But now we shall hear from the one whose ministry was so closely aligned with the seed's delivery on earth. And I trust that you will see, Alamar, even more obedience has its place in the plans of our Lord." King Herod observed the dedication of a newly completed building he had ordered to be constructed. He watched an official from his court stand by as a priest prayed over the site, which was to be a charitable office governed by the temple wards. As the priest prayed, his eyes scanned the horizon of the dusty, noisy, and always agitated city of Jerusalem. There in the distance, just to the right of the new building, the temple could be seen. The temple project, an ambitious work and Herod's pride, had been going on for some 22 years. It was truly a marvel. In hopes of an obvious and favorable comparison, Herod made sure to use the same type of soft white stones used for Solomon's temple. Called the Great, largely because of his magnificent buildings, amphitheaters, sporting centers, ports, and the mighty fortress of Masada, Herod now employed some 10,000 workmen to build the temple, including over 1,000 priests, whose presence was necessary, since laymen could not enter the temple proper. It was to be his crowning achievement, one that would secure his legacy in the minds and hearts of his cantankerous people. But now, with the sun bearing down, he grew impatient over the long prayer of the priest. As the prayer droned on, he thought backwards in time to his ascension to power through the political connivance of his father. He recalled the early days of consolidating power and partnering with Rome. He looked toward the temple and thought of the future he was building for his children. But mostly he thought of his own immortality. Herod was getting old and saw every minute as precious. For all his intrigue and political skill, he could not manufacture more time for his life. So he guarded his life very carefully. Suspicious by nature, Herod had obtained his throne through subtlety and murder, and had retained it the same way. Anyone he considered a threat to his throne was immediately dealt with, up to and including his own wife and children. It was an uneasy kingdom over which Herod reigned. Finally, the priest finished. The ceremonial party looked up at the sedan chair in which Herod sat, borne by 4 large Egyptian slaves that had been a gift from the Roman governor. Herod stepped down from his perch and walked over to the sight. He took the golden goblet from the hand of the priest and poured wine along the doorstep of the building. "I hereby call you as witnesses that this office is now officially open," Herod said with great reverence. "May it be a blessing to the poor in this nation of ours, and may the Lord always bless our nation." "So be it," said the officials. Then the priest took the cup and poured wine onto the pavement in front of the entrance. Several drops of the dark red liquid splashed on Herod's robe. The priest gasped in terror and stepped back, as did several of the other officials. Herod looked down at the robe and then back at the trembling priest. He smiled, and the tension broke. Herod quickly turned and stepped back into his chair, ordering the slaves to take him on to the temple. He would inspect its progress. He motioned for the temple warden to approach him. The man nervously came to Herod's sedan. "Yes, sire?" said the warden. "Wonderful ceremony," Herod said, swatting at a fly with a horsetail baton. "Many thanks, my king," said the man. "Your presence here is always inspiring." "Yes, today it was exceedingly inspiring." He lifted up the skirt of his ruined robe. "See to it this priest is removed to a less public duty." "At once, sire," returned the warden, as the sedan began moving. The guard who accompanied Herod went ahead and cleared a path for him. Herod hated traveling with an armed unit, but the Romans insisted on it, and besides, there were many living relatives of those executed under his orders. As he moved through the narrow street, he sat back in the chair, the curtains drawn so no one could see inside. Suddenly the sedan was knocked to one side. Herod slipped onto the floor, caught off guard. He could hear screaming outside. It was a man ranting about the cowardice of Herod and how he was a Roman lapdog unfit to rule in Judah. The guards cleared the area, calling for reinforcements as a crowd gathered. In minutes, Roman sentries arrived and dispersed the crowds. Once the situation was under control, Herod stepped out. The crowd gasped in astonishment as their king emerged from the sedan. He looked at the hate-filled eyes of a man of about 30. The man looked like any other Jew, except he had a fire in his eyes that was unnerving, even to Herod. An officer produced a dagger the man had concealed in his cloak and had intended to use on the king. Herod walked over to the man who was held securely by his guards. "Did you mean this for me?" asked Herod. "Yes," answered the man. "I intended it for your black heart." "But what have I done to you?" asked Herod, now clearly in control and aware of his audience. "Do I know you? Have we ever met?" "You are a murderer and a fraud," the man continued, turning his head this way and that, speaking to the silent crowd. "I know I shall die for this, but it will have been worth it for my son to remember that I resisted you. If only he would have remembered me killing you." Herod looked over at a woman under Roman guard who was crying. She held the hand of a small boy about 4 years of age. Herod looked at the boy. "Is this your son?" Herod asked with chilling gentleness. "Yes," said the man, nervous as Herod made his way over to the boy. "My wife knew of my intentions and came to stop me. But I'm glad my son saw this. He will remember this day, and one day he will grow up and perhaps bring freedom to my people." "No doubt, no doubt," said Herod, stroking the young boy's head. "I'm not sure he will ever grow up to be a freedom fighter. Perhaps he won't even grow up at all." The boy's mother began crying and begging for her son's life. Herod waved her off as if to say that the boy would be spared. but he will indeed remember the day he saw his father die. Take this man to the place of execution. And the boy." The crowd gasped once more, and Herod was satisfied that this display of swift justice should remind them whose authority they were under. "You will die one day, Herod," screamed the man as he was led away. "You will stand before the judge of heaven and earth. There is a king coming who will take your place, the place of all authority in Israel." The last words were cut off by a severe blow to his mouth, administered by one of the guards. Herod watched as the mother followed after, pleading for her husband to be quiet and begging for his life. The boy broke away and looked back at Herod. "Simon," she screamed at the boy, "stay with me." Then the two disappeared in the crowded street. People began talking in hushed conversation, looking and pointing and watching Herod. For his part, Herod became uncomfortable with the situation and quickly climbed back into his chair. "Get me back to the Antonia! At once, you fools!" he shouted. The guards closed in tightly around Herod as they hastily made their way back to Herod's fortress palace in Jerusalem. He had decided to visit the temple construction site another day. As the band moved through the street on its way back to the Antonia, a messenger approached the party. Herod's personal aide waved him through. The courier bowed low and handed the note to the aide, who in turn handed it to Herod. Herod took the dispatch and read it. "Well now, this is interesting," he said, handing the message back to his aide. "It seems we have visitors in Jerusalem. 3 of them, to be exact."